Hello and welcome. And another whole week has gone by. My goodness, who would know it? But yes, we've had just 3 days away this week. Managed to get to Scotland at long last to see our son Toby. It's been a long, long time since we've seen him, and with him being a single gentleman living on his own, it was really lovely to have some big hugs. Mum and son hugs, they're important, aren't they? And although we didn't too bad for the weather, the drive back yesterday, oh my goodness, yes, lots of bad stormy weather to drive through, but we survived it. And so I'm back at my desk doing all the things that I need to do. So I just wondered what's happened in your week, and I hope it's been a good one despite the blustery weather. It's interesting, isn't it, when we think about it, that what people say about us can be hugely revealing. I don't know how comfortable you are about hearing what people think about you, but it is true that what people say about us is hugely revealing. Now, I've conducted countless funerals over the years, and many for people that I have never ever met. When preparing for any funeral, but especially for an individual that I know nothing about, I have a firm rule. And that rule is that I will not take the service until I feel that I've come to understand and know the person. For I believe that when we give thanks to God for someone's life, that service itself needs to be a complete footprint of the person, with loved ones walking out afterwards, uttering the words, "That was so John or Bill or Mary or Hazel," etc. And I often get a lot of pleasure, even amid the grief and the loss, when I spend time with those who are planning the funeral. For bit by bit, a picture emerges of an incredible life, a precious individual created in the image of God. None of us are perfect, and I certainly do not agree with saying wonderful things about someone if they are not true, for I am not in the business of creating unworthy saints. However, an honest and an authentic account of a life is a wonderful window into the soul. Now, we can, of course, be very British and only want to speak well of the dead. But I find that after a goodly amount of time, the real story of the person who has died, that begins to surface, and I feel that I am getting to know them. I have learned over the years that the questions you ask and who you ask them to, those questions are key. Some stories contain heartbreaking tragedies, some mind-blowing achievements, and nearly always moments that when shared cause both me and the family members to burst out laughing. It is always humbling. It is always a privilege to hear the answers to my questions and then stand up and give an account of who someone was. There are so many times when I feel a tinge of regret that I never actually got to meet the person when they were alive. But I still feel that I encounter them through the words of others. For it is so very true that what others say about us is hugely revealing. I am intrigued, therefore, that in today's set gospel passage, Jesus wants to know what others are saying about him. He wants to know who they think he is. So let's have a read of this short passage set for Sunday, the 23rd of August. So if you have your Bible with you, then join me as I turn to Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 to 20. So as usual, I'm reading from my New Living Translation. Matthew 16, beginning at verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" "Well," they replied, "some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say Jeremiah or one of the other prophets." Then he asked them, "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "You are blessed, Simon, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. You did not learn this from any human being. Now I say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you lock on earth will be locked in heaven, and whatever you open on earth will be opened in heaven." Then he sternly warned them not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. If a stranger walked up to you in the street and asked you the question, "Who do you say Jesus is?" I wonder what your response would be. Who do you say Jesus is? What answers automatically come flooding into your brain as I ask this very question? Who do you say Jesus is? Now, you might want to pause this to think about it, or you might have already uttered all the things that have popped into your head. And I wonder, would your response be different if a family member asked you the same question? Particularly if that family member was not a believer. We're often careful with our words, aren't we? We're gentle. We're considerate. We're mindful of how we might be perceived or understood, or indeed misunderstood. Talking about our faith in many ways can feel much, much easier to a stranger than to those that know us intimately. Who do the crowds today say Jesus is, I wonder? Who do the crowds today, those on our streets, those that live around us, who do they say that Jesus is? For many, his name is merely a swear word and has no other relevance. For some, he is an interesting historical person. For others, Jesus is a prophet. For some, he was a rebel of his day. And for Christians, he is the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God. But what does that mean? And do our lives communicate our understanding? When Jesus was going about his ministry with his disciples in the first century Israel, everyone was asking, "Who is this man?" including his own family. We don't often stop to think about that, do we? His own family were asking that question. Maybe they were asking, who on earth does he think he is? That would sound more familiar. Rumours were rife. Discussions, arguments, confusion, wild guesses, brave assumptions. And in a quiet, intimate moment, when Jesus is alone with his inner circle, with his closest friends, his disciples, he picks their brains and he asks, so who do people say I am? And then he puts them on the spot and he says, what about you? Who do you say I am? I wonder what went through their minds when Jesus asked them this question. Did they have an answer? Were they unsure? Did they think it was a test? And if they said something, would they just get it wrong? Good old impulsive Peter, the one I described 2 weeks ago as opening his mouth before he engages his brain. Peter. He jumps in, doesn't he? He jumps straight in, as usual, with a very bold statement. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Or in some translations, he says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Did he really know? Did he really know and really understand what he had said? Was he trotting out a phrase that he had heard? Was he trying to impress, be the top disciple, the favoured one? Or was it an instinctive response? An instinctive response that actually revealed what was in his heart? It's hard to tell, really, but he certainly drew praise from Jesus. Although the reading for next Sunday shows us that when Peter speaks again, the response from Jesus is very different indeed. But here, right now, in this precious, precious moment, Peter is glowing with praise, for he has either by chance or by deep understanding hit the nail well and truly on the head by confessing Jesus as divine and the promised and long-awaited Messiah. Jesus' response was probably baffling to Peter and the gathered disciples. But looking back through a lens that is 2,000 years old, we see now that it is, in many ways, a prophecy about a new church built up of followers of Jesus. And Peter did indeed become the leader of this group. Whether what we have now in our Christian church, fragmented by so many denominations, is what Jesus had in mind is highly questionable. Certainly our representation of the kingdom of God is poor at best, I would say. But we are human and we are flawed. And history has proved that humanity is always hungry for power and domination. But in Peter and in those early followers, Jesus saw a new way ahead, a way of thinking, a way of living with the kingdom values that he demonstrated. And the desire to follow in the footsteps of Jesus is something that actually we've never really lost. even if we get it wrong multiple times. That desire to follow in the footsteps of Jesus, to try and live out kingdom values, is still there, even if we get it wrong over and over. After the praise and the acknowledgement that Peter has stumbled upon the truth, we might perhaps be shocked that Jesus comes right back at his friends with a stern order for them not to tell anyone. Now, you'd think they'd be bursting, wouldn't you, to tell everyone, especially Peter. I mean, he's done it. He's said the right thing. He must be very excited at the praise that he received. And he must want to rush off, at least tell his family. But Jesus says, no, no one is to say a word. And we might be initially a bit shocked at that reaction, but when we understand the implication of Peter's answer, it all begins to make some sense for us. In first century Israel, the Messiah, or the Christ, that they were expecting and hoping for was in the form of some kind of military king. A military king who would lead an army against Rome, free the people, and establish the rule of God in the land. Jesus definitely didn't want Peter or any of the other disciples telling the crowds that he was that military king. For his mission as we know now, involves suffering, betrayal, death, and ultimately victory over death. He is not going to be a military conqueror, and he is not going to wage a military campaign against the Roman rule. So any hint or any rumour that Jesus was to be the leader of a revolution and overthrow the government was dangerous talk, attracting the kind of attention that Jesus was attempting to avoid at this stage in his ministry. We know now that his ministry was far, far bigger than that, even if Peter and the other disciples were yet to understand it. They were still hoping, right up to the end, for some kind of military coup, some release from the oppression of Roman rule. But Jesus came to teach a better way of living, a way of following God's will. But that way of living, that following of God's will, well, for many, they are still unable or unwilling to give up their pursuit of the things of this world in order to follow the way of Christ. The world represented then by the tyranny of the Roman rule, and the world that is represented now. Many still unwilling or unable to give up the things, the power, the things that are wrapped up in order to follow Christ and try and live kingdom values. I guess the modern day question is actually no different, is it? Do we compromise our faith in order to fit into the world as it is? There can be a massive tension between the trappings of our modern day society. And some of it's great, don't get me wrong, it's not bad, it's not all bad. But working out what's good and what's bad, that's tricky. And there can be great tension between the trappings of society and the desire to follow God. Being a person of faith doesn't involve a quiet life, if only. It involves hard choices about our lifestyles. The question that Jesus put to his disciples all those years ago, it's the same question that he asks us today. Who do you say I am? How we answer that question ultimately will be revealed through the life that we live. What others say about us after we have died. For what people say about us can be hugely revealing. What, I wonder, do our lives say about who we think Jesus is? Makes you think, doesn't it? Certainly made me think. I will see you next Sunday. Stay safe and may God bless you.